cold marble struck the back of his head, and Daniel Kahn opened his eyes. The ceiling above him stretched upward for dozens of meters, and there, in the dim light, holographic tables rotated slowly. Thousands of lines, numbers, ranks, prices. His brain hadn't yet processed where he was, but his fingers had already twitched. These weren't his fingers. Too thin, too young. He tried to sit up, and his head exploded with pain. Someone nearby monotonously announced that the evaluation was complete and that the subject had been classified as F rank. Ability distinguishes shades of gray better than average. Recommendation, alienation and sale. Starting price, 1 copper coin. The voice belonged to an automated system. No one around him even turned to look. Daniel sat down on the floor and looked at his hands. Someone else's palms, someone else's lines, someone else's life. The last thing he remembered was the rain and the steps of the underpass and the blow to his temple against the cold metal. Then darkness, then this floor. He didn't understand what had happened, but he knew one thing for sure. He had died, and somehow he'd ended up here, in someone else's body. On the floor of a huge hall where human abilities were traded like soybean futures. He stood up and felt himself sway. The nearest terminal glowed green. Lines of auction text scrolled across the screen. Lot 4417. Rank S pyrokinesis. Current bid, 17 million. Lot 4418. Rank A gravity control. Current bid, 4 million. Lot 4419. Ability to distinguish shades of gray better than average. F rank. Current bid, 1 copper coin. Bidders, 0. His gift, listed automatically. No one even bothered to ask for his consent. Daniel stared at the screen and something clicked quietly inside his head. Not panic, not fear, not shock at the fact that he was both dead and alive at the same time in a foreign world. No, it was professional recognition. He'd lived on Earth for 23 years, and for the last 2 of those, he'd been building composite indices from junk data for an insurance company in Seattle. He looked at this auction and saw no magic. He saw a stock exchange. An ordinary stock exchange with monstrously inefficient pricing in the lower segment. The top lots were trading aggressively, dozens of bids per second. The algorithms of clan traders battled for every percentage point. But at the bottom was a desert. Thousands of lots, each worth a single coin. Not a single buyer, not a single analyst, not a single valuation model. The market had simply decided that anything below C rank was junk and stopped paying attention. Daniel slowly lowered his gaze to his pockets. In his right pocket, he found 7 copper coins. His left pocket was empty. 7 coins, 7 positions in his portfolio. He looked back at the screen where his gift hung unsold and unwanted. Then he looked at the long rows of terminals in the lower segment where thousands of forgotten lots were flashing. And for the first time since his death, he smiled. More than enough to get started. The Seattle International Talent Exchange Hall occupied 3 floors of the former convention center. The upper level gleamed. People in suits walked there. Security, clan representatives, private brokers with licenses and $1,000 ties. The middle level was simpler. It was crowded with mid-ranking awakened C and B ranks. They were filling out forms, waiting for evaluations, and nervously checking quotes on their tablets. No one visited the lower level of their own free will. Linoleum instead of marble. Dim lamps. Only 1 out of 5 terminals working. Behind the reception desk sat a girl of about 23 with a name tag that read Myri Chung, Junior Agent, Lower Tier. She stared at the screen with the expression of someone who had long since stopped expecting customers. Daniel approached the counter and Myri looked up. She looked at him for a second, then at the awakened card he held out, then back at him. She said she could see he'd just received his evaluation and that she was very sorry. Her voice was professionally warm, rehearsed. She said those words dozens of times a day. Daniel replied that he didn't need condolences. He needed access to the lower segment catalog, the complete catalog. All lots from F- to D-, filtered by ability type, listing date, and number of previous owners. Myri blinked. In her 3 years working on the lower tier, 2 types of people had come to her. The first type cried, the second type shouted. No one had ever asked for a filtered catalog. She replied that the complete catalog contained more than 80,000 entries and that it was hardly worth his time. Daniel said that time was the only thing he had right now, and 7 more coins. Myri shrugged and turned the terminal toward him. The screen lit up. 83,412 lots, each worth 1 copper coin, each rejected by someone, each deemed useless. Daniel sat down in front of the terminal and began to read, line by line, lot after lot. I don't sweat in the summer. I always know what time it is. My nails grow evenly. I can tell when a cat is watching me. I can tell exactly how many coins are in a pile of up to 20. Meyer watched him from behind the counter, trying to figure out what he was doing. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. He was reading everything, methodically, as if there were some kind of system in those 80,000 trashy trinkets, some kind of order, some kind of meaning that only he could see. An hour passed, then 2. Meyer brought him a glass of water from the vending machine, not because she felt sorry for him, but because she was bored and he was the only living person on the lower level. Daniel thanked her without taking his eyes off the screen. His mind worked the way it always had. On Earth, he'd compile indices from parameters that were useless on their own. The humidity level in the basement, the frequency of calls to tech support, the average age of the wiring in a house. Taken individually, each parameter meant nothing. Together, they formed a model that predicted an insurance claim with 87% accuracy. It was the same here, only the parameters were called abilities. And no one tried to combine them, because why combine junk? By evening, he had selected 3 lots. F-rank night vision, the ability to see in the dark slightly better than vision. F-rank speed reading, the ability to read 10% faster than average. F-, rank cold resistance, the ability to feel the cold slightly less than a normal person. 3 coins, 3 worthless gifts. He walked over to Meyer and placed the 3 coins on the counter. She looked at the items he'd chosen, then at him, then back at the items. Out of habit, she asked if he was absolutely sure he wanted to spend nearly half of all his money on this. Daniel nodded. Meyer processed the purchase. 3 small crystals rolled out of a slot in the terminal. Dull, almost transparent. One was slightly silvery, one was pale blue, one was barely noticeably cloudy. She said she needed a signature right here and that returns weren't accepted. Daniel signed and took the crystals. Meyer watched him go and thought that tomorrow he'd come back and yell. They all came back and yelled. Daniel walked out of the stock exchange building into a gray Seattle evening. Rain. Of course, rain. It's always raining in Seattle, even in a world where the sky split into 9 parts 7 years ago. He found a cheap motel 3 blocks from the stock exchange, $20 a night. He paid with the money he'd found in the wallet of the body's former owner. The room was small, a bed, a table, a chair. The wallpaper was peeling in the corner. Daniel sat down on the floor and laid out 3 crystals in front of him. 4 coins remained in his pocket, 4 positions in his portfolio for the future. He closed his eyes and activated the only thing recorded on his awakened card. Synthesis. Rank F-. Classification, decorative. Description, allows 2 disparate abilities to be combined into one. Practical value, 0. That's what the whole world thought, because the whole world had tried combining trash with trash and ended up with trash. No one had tried to think. No one had asked the question, what if it's not about ranks, but about combinations? Daniel took the first 2 crystals, night vision and speed reading. The synthesis began. It was like 2 streams of water merging into one. It hurt. Not physically, deeper. As if 2 fragments of someone else's memory were trying to find common ground inside his head. He lay down on the floor and closed his eyes. He waited. Daniel Hahn woke up in a stranger's body on the floor of the International Talent Exchange. His F-, ranked synthesis ability allows him to combine gifts, but it was useless. He spent 3 of his 7 coins on junk lots and initiated his first synthesis. Meyer Chung, the cashier on the lower level, became the first person he interacted with in this world. 16 hours. That's exactly how long the first synthesis lasted. Daniel lay on the floor of a motel room, unable to move. 2 streams of someone else's memories inside his head intertwined, repelled each other, and intertwined again. Night vision tried to become reading. Reading tried to become vision. They had nothing in common and everything in common at the same time. To see was to read information. To read was to read information. The difference lay only in the channel. Somewhere around the 9th hour, the pain subsided. At the 12th, warmth appeared. At the 15th, he ceased to feel the boundary between the two gifts. At the 16th hour, Daniel opened his eyes. The room was dark, night outside the window. He didn't turn on the light. He didn't need light. He could see, not like before, not just outlines in the dark. He could see the structure, the wallpaper on the wall. The adhesive beneath it had degraded by 23%. Age of the installation, about 23 years. The door, a temperature gradient beneath it, half a degree warmer outside than inside. Someone had been standing behind the door 7 minutes ago. The heat hadn't dissipated yet. The ceiling, a micro crack in the plaster, stress in the structure. This floor had been rebuilt after the earthquake. Poorly. They'd skimped on the rebar. Daniel sat down and felt nauseous, not from pain, from the sheer volume of information. His brain had received too much information at once and didn't know where to put it all. He closed his eyes, opened them again. The ceiling, the crack, the temperature gradient, the wallpaper. Everything was in its place. He slowly stood up and walked over to the window. The city beyond the glass was different. Not the city he'd arrived in yesterday. People on the street below. He could see the way they walked and tell who was tired, who was in a hurry, and who was limping on their left leg. Streetlights, flicker frequency. That one's on direct current. That one runs on AC and will burn out in a week. Cars, tire wear based on the angle of the body. Daniel stepped away from the window and sat down on the bed. His hands were shaking. 2 trash gifts, 1 coin each. Together, they'd given him this, but that was only 2/3. The third crystal lay on the floor. Cold resistance rated F-. The most despised gift of the 3. To freeze just a little less. Who needs that? Daniel picked up the crystal and turned it between his fingers. Cold is the absence of molecular motion. Cold resistance is the ability to distinguish the state of molecular motion. At the F-. level, it's almost nothing, just a faint background noise. But if he added it to what he already had, information reading plus the reading of molecular. Information is movement. Data is the movement of particles. He initiated the second synthesis. The pain returned, worse than the first time, much worse, because now it wasn't 2 raw gifts merging but the result of the synthesis and a third component. The complexity was growing exponentially. Daniel fell onto the bed and clenched his teeth. 4 hours. He counted the seconds because he had nothing else to do. By the 2nd hour, he began to see things that weren't there. Ghostly streams of data flowed through the walls. By the 3rd hour, he could no longer tell where the room ended and the street began. By the 4th hour, everything stopped. Silence. Absolute silence. Then the world came back on. Daniel lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, and saw everything. Not like before. Not the structure, not the temperature, not the wear and tear. Everything. The man in the next room was reading a book, a thriller. Daniel knew this from the frequency with which the pages were turned. Too fast for non-fiction, too erratic for a novel, a jagged rhythm. The person was scared. 2 floors below, someone was crying. The rate of breathing indicated that it had been going on for at least 20 minutes. Salty moisture on the pillow. A woman, between 30 and 40 years old. Through the vibrations of the floor transmitted through the mattress, Daniel could sense that there were 27 people in the building. Their heartbeats, their movements, their little lives. He sat on the floor of a dingy motel, in a stranger's body in a strange world, and wept. Not out of grief, not out of fear. Because, for the first time since his death, he felt alive. That he could do something. That he was worth more than a single copper coin. He would name it later, come up with a beautiful name, divine perception. But for now, he just sat there and wept and saw the whole world around him as an endless data table in which every cell was filled with meaning. Morning. Daniel washed his face with cold water and looked in the mirror. A stranger's face. Thin, young, dark circles under his eyes, Asian features. The face of a guy who had failed the assessment and whom the world had written off. Now it was his face. 4 coins in his pocket, divine perception in his head, and hunger. He hadn't eaten in nearly 2 days. Breakfast at the motel cost 3 coins. That was unacceptable. 3 coins meant 3 potential positions in his portfolio. Daniel went out onto the street and found a free food distribution at a temple 2 blocks away. Rice porridge. Tasteless. Sufficient. He ate while watching the street. Divine perception was working constantly. He couldn't turn it off. The stream of data flowed continuously. Every very passerby was a set of parameters: heart rate, gait, skin temperature, wear and tear on shoes, age of clothing, blink rate. Daniel sat with his bowl of porridge and saw that the man across from him was lying to his wife on the phone, that the 12-year-old girl on the bench wasn't doing her homework but was drawing in her notebook and was afraid her mother would notice, that the elderly church worker was sick and knew it but wasn't going to the doctor because he was the diagnosis. Too much information. He finished his porridge and headed for the exchange. He had a plan, a rough one, untested, but it was a plan. On the upper tiers of the MBT, clan traders used predictive algorithms to trade high-rank abilities. They analyzed supply and demand and tried to predict the next price movement in fractions of a second. Micro-arbitrage. Buy here, sell there, make money on the spread. The problem was that their algorithms were good, very good. Beating them on the upper tier was impossible, but on the lower tier, there were no algorithms at all. Because there was no liquidity on the lower tier, no one traded junk, except him. Daniel entered the exchange building and went down to the lower tier. Meyer was sitting behind the counter. She saw him and raised an eyebrow slightly. She said she hadn't expected to see him again so soon. Usually, people come back after a week, and they're yelling. Daniel replied that he needed access to the lower segment's transaction history for the past 3 years. Mir said it was public data, and that he could look at it as much as he wanted, but that there was nothing to see there. Daniel sat down at the terminal and began working. Divine perception transformed the screen into something more than just a set of numbers. He saw patterns, regularities impossible to detect with the naked eye. Every month, certain types of F-rank abilities rose slightly in price, by a fraction of a coin, imperceptibly, but they were rising, because somewhere in the system there was demand that no one was tracking. Someone was buying, a little, rarely, but they were buying. And a week after the purchase, similar abilities on neighboring exchanges around the world would also shift slightly, a delay, inefficiency, an arbitrage window. Daniel ran the model in 2 hours. On Earth, it would have taken 3 days. Here, he had divine perception and a burning motivation. The model was simple. He buys certain lots on the lower tier of the Seattle exchange for 1 coin. 3 to 4 days, similar lots on the Tokyo or London exchanges would rise by 2 or 3 coins. He would sell. The difference was negligible, but with 0 entry costs and an infinite number of lots, even a negligible difference multiplied by 100 trades yielded an acceptable result. He bought his first lot with his last available coin. 4 days later, he sold it for 3. With those 3, he bought 3 more. A week later, he had 11 coins. 2 weeks later, 47. Mir watched him every day. He'd come in the morning, sit down at the terminal, buy junk, sell junk, buy some more. She didn't understand what was going on. The numbers in his account were growing, but so slowly that it seemed pointless. One day, she couldn't take it anymore and asked what he was doing. Daniel answered without looking up from the screen. He said he was building a position. Mir asked what kind of position you could build from junk. For the first time in 2 weeks, Daniel looked at her. He really looked at her. Divine perception revealed everything to him. The fatigue in his neck muscles from 8-hour shifts, the worn fingertips from the terminal, the microscopic tremor in his right hand, a sign of chronic sleep deprivation. But there was something else. When she asked the question, his pulse quickened slightly, not from nervousness, from interest, genuine interest, the first in a long time. He replied that trash was just a word people had invented for things they didn't know how to use. Meyer snorted and said it was a beautiful phrase, but that she'd been working on the trash floor for 3 years and had seen enough to know better. Trash is trash. Daniel nodded and went back to the screen. He didn't argue. Not yet, anyway. By the end of the 3rd week, Daniel had 193 coins in his account. By the end of the 4th, 340. The growth was exponential but imperceptible to the system. 340 copper coins is less than 1 silver coin. A silver coin is worth less than a meal at a mid-tier restaurant. On the upper tiers of the exchange, millions changed hands every minute. Down below, 100 coins was an event that no monitor even registered. Daniel worked 14 hours a day. He'd arrive at the exchange in the morning, he'd analyze the flows, he'd buy, he sold. In the evening, he returned to the motel and spent 2 hours studying the catalog of abilities. Not for trading, for synthesis. He was mapping out compatibility. Which gifts could enhance his perception? Which would open up new avenues? Which would give him what he lacked most of all? Protection. Because Daniel Kahn was smart. but he was completely defenseless. Divine perception allowed him to see a punch a second before the fist touched his face. But it didn't allow him to stop that punch. He saw the world, but he couldn't influence it. Not yet, anyway. On the 26th day, he bought 2 new lots. I sense an F-rank floor vibration. I know the distance to the nearest rank F- wall. 2 worthless gifts. But Daniel saw something else in them. Feeling the vibration is spatial sensitivity. Knowing the distance to the wall is spatial calibration. Together with divine perception, this gave him more than just sight. It gave him a 3-dimensional map of the surrounding world, in real time, accurate to the centimeter. He started the synthesis in the evening. This one was easier, 10 hours, perhaps because the foundation was already complex and the 2 simple components flowed into it like streams into a river. In the morning, he opened his eyes and realized he knew where every object in the room was. He didn't see it, he knew, with his eyes closed. The table was 2 meters and 14 centimeters to his left. The chair was 1 meter and 41 centimeters behind him. The wall was 4 meters and 90 centimeters ahead of him. A cockroach in the corner of the ceiling, even the cockroach. He gave the updated ability the same name, Divine Perception, just an expanded version 2.0. Meyer noticed a change in him, not because he started moving differently, but because he stopped bumping into the corners of the terminals. Before, he'd bump into them every day because he was reading the screen and not looking around. Now he maneuvered between them without looking up. She didn't say anything, but Daniel saw her squint. She was starting to notice. Bad. No, not bad. Inevitable. He couldn't work on the stock exchange every day and remain completely invisible. Sooner or later, someone would take notice. The question was who would be the first. On the 30th day, Daniel made a decision. Meyer was either a risk or an asset. There was no third option. A risk. She could tell someone about the strange guy who traded junk every day and, for some reason, made money. An asset. She knew the lower segment like no one else in that building. 3 years behind the counter. Thousands of transactions had passed through her hands. She'd seen every lot that came and went. She knew patterns that even Daniel couldn't deduce from public data. Inside information. Not in a criminal sense. Just experience. Working memory. A cashier's intuition. He approached her at the end of the workday when no one was left on the lower level but the 2 of them. He asked when her shift ended. Mire replied that it had ended half an hour ago, but that she was in no hurry to leave. Daniel said he wanted to offer her a job. Mire laughed. Quiet. Tired. She said she already had a job, and that even though it was the junk section, it came with a steady paycheck and health insurance, and she wasn't about to quit everything for a guy who sold junk for copper coins. Daniel said he wasn't asking her to quit her main job. He was offering her a consulting contract, 2 hours a week. She told him about the lots that passed through her hands, which ones were returned, which ones sat on the shelf the longest, which ones were bought by strange people at strange times. The pay? 10% of his profit. Mire stopped laughing. 10% was 34 coins at the moment. Nothing. But she looked at his face and saw that he wasn't joking, and something in his calmness made her think. She asked why he needed this information. Daniel replied that he was building a model. Meyer asked, "A model of what?" Daniel answered, "A model of how the world works." She was silent for 5 seconds. Daniel counted. Then she said, "All right." But if he turned out to be a fraud, she would personally turn him in to security. Daniel nodded. That's how their partnership began. Meyer turned out to be better than he'd expected. She didn't just know the patterns. She could sense the lower segment. 3 years behind the counter had taught her things you can't find in the data. She knew that every Tuesday at 11 in the morning, an old man would come in, buy a single F-rank item, and walk out in silence. A different one every time, but always related to memory. I remember the way home. I don't forget my classmates' names. I can recognize people by their voices even 10 years later. Meyer didn't know why he did it. Daniel knew. The old man was losing his memory, Alzheimer's or its local equivalent, and he bought these gifts hoping they would help. They didn't help. An F-rank gift can't cure a disease. But Daniel had filed these lots under a separate category, gifts related to memory and cognitive functions. They might come in handy for synthesis. Later. Mireille told her story, And Daniel listened, and his model grew. Every evening, he returned to the motel and updated his mental map. 83,000 lots. But now, they weren't just a chaotic list. They were a system. Clusters, groups, connections. Gifts that individually meant nothing, but together could become something impossible. The problem was money. 340 coins allowed him to trade, but they weren't enough to buy in bulk. His plan required thousands, tens of thousands. And that's where he hit his first roadblock. Micro-arbitrage provided a steady income, but it was slow. At his current pace, it would take him half a year to reach the volume needed for serious purchases. Half a year is too long, because on the 42nd day, something happened. Daniel was sitting at his terminal on the lower level when perception detected an anomaly, a vibration in the floor. Someone's footsteps, heavy, confident. Not a client, not a security guard. Someone from the upper level. The man came down the stairs and stopped in the doorway. A man in his 30s, an expensive suit, a badge on his lapel. Daniel saw the badge and his pulse quickened. Clan Y. A round emblem with a golden hieroglyph. The largest clan on the MBT, the biggest player on the market. The man walked through the lower level without looking at anyone. He stopped at a terminal, scrolled through something, made a note, left. The entire visit took 4 minutes. Meyer watched him leave with a stony expression. When he left, she said quietly that this was bad. The U-Clan's analytics department checks the lower segment once a quarter. It's standard procedure, but usually they send an intern. This one was a senior analyst. She recognized him. He only came when something caught their attention. Daniel asked what could have caught their attention. Meyer looked at him for a long time. Then she said that in 3 years of working on the lower tier, she had never once seen a single person make more than 10 transactions a week. Daniel had made about 40. He sat motionless. His senses registered everything. The acceleration of his own pulse, the microscopic constriction of his blood vessels, adrenaline, the first real fear since arriving in this world. The U-Clan had noticed him, not him personally, not his abilities, his activity, an anomalous buyer in a dead market. It was like a flash of light in a dark room, impossible to miss. He'd made a mistake. He'd gotten too carried away with optimization, too many transactions, too fast. A basic blunder by an analyst who forgot that he wasn't in a spreadsheet, but in a living system with observers. Daniel closed the terminal and walked out. On the street, he stopped and took 3 deep breaths. Rain. Of course, rain. Think. You have 4 coins in reserve, the arbitrage model, divine perception, and now he's marked. What does an analyst do when his position attracts unwanted attention? He reduces volume, diversifies, changes his pattern, or does the exact opposite, increases the noise, becomes not an anomaly but part of the background. Daniel stood in the rain and thought. 5 minutes later, he had a new plan. He needed other buyers on the lower tier, not as a cover, to blend in. If one person makes 40 trades, that's an anomaly. If 20 people each make 2 trades, that's the market. He needed people. People with trash gifts whom he could give a reason to buy. And he had a reason. Because Daniel knew something that no one else in this world knew. Trash gifts aren't trash. They're underappreciated components. And the time had come to show this to at least one person. Meyer Chung hated her gift. That was the first thing Daniel realized about her when he started really paying attention. For 3 years, she'd sat behind the counter on the lower level, smiling at people who came to her on the worst day of their lives, the day they were told their ability was worthless. She'd smile and say she was so sorry. And her gift? My smile calms the client just a little bit. F minus minus. It worked. Barely noticeable. People left her a little calmer than when they arrived, by 0.5%, by 1 degree, by 1 second of silence in their heads. No one noticed this, not the clients, not even her. Her colleagues on the upper tiers made fun of her. Meyer with her soothing smile, useless Meyer. Daniel observed her for 6 days. He couldn't watch any longer because there wasn't enough time. The U-Clan had already taken notice. But 6 days were enough. Divine perception revealed 3 things to him. First, when Meyer smiled at a client, her vocal cords generated a second harmonic at a frequency inaudible to the human ear, but the subconscious hears it. This harmonic was truly soothing, not just a little, more than she realized. It's just that the effect was spread out over time, not an instant burst of calm, a slow sense of relief that the client felt an hour after the conversation. And by that point, he no longer remembered who had spoken to him. Second, Mir had secondary micro-talents. Every awakened received one primary gift, but sometimes, barely measurable additional effects would appear alongside it, too faint to be recorded, too insignificant to be classified. Meyer had 2 of them. I can remember voices, and I never forget a grudge. The first meant that she remembered every client she'd spoken with over the past 3 years, every voice, every inflection. The second meant that she remembered every pain she'd heard, every scream, every quiet sob behind the counter. She carried 3 years of other people's grief within her and couldn't shake it off. The third? Meyer was convinced that her kindness wasn't real, that she was pretending, that her smile was a professional mask, not a genuine feeling. Divine perception told her otherwise. Every time she smiled at a client, her pulse slowed by 2 beats. This wasn't a controlled reaction, it was an empathetic response. She really did feel it. She'd simply stopped believing that she felt anything. Daniel came to see her after his shift on the 7th day. She was sitting in an empty cafe across the street from the stock exchange. Cheap tea, a sandwich she'd barely touched. Exhaustion. He sat down across from her and said he needed to tell her something about her gift. Meyer looked at him and her face hardened. She said that if he'd come out of pity, he could leave. She didn't need comforting. She'd been comforting others for 3 years and knew exactly how it worked and how it looked from the outside. Daniel replied that he hadn't come out of pity. He'd come with a proposal, a business one. He said that her gift was worth far more than she thought. Not in coins, in functionality. Meyer crossed her arms over her chest. She asked what was so special about her smile that 10 minutes of meditation and a glass of warm milk couldn't provide. Daniel replied that her smile generated a subconscious sound wave that affected the listener's limbic system. Meyer was silent for 3 seconds. Then she asked how he knew that. Daniel didn't answer that question. Instead, he asked if she wanted to find out what her gift was capable of if it were properly harnessed. Meyer looked at him. Divine perception showed Daniel her pulse. It was racing, not from fear, but from hope. Small, angry, crushed by 3 years of disappointment, but alive. She said yes. Then she quickly added that if it turned out to be a lie, she'd break his nose. Daniel nodded and said those were fair terms. The next morning, he spent 14 coins, 2 lots. I'm good at remembering voices, F-. The crystal is small and slightly yellowish. I don't forget a grudge, F-. The crystal is even smaller and completely dull. These 2 gifts were copies of Meyer's microtalents, not her own, alienated by someone else, but identical in function. Daniel needed 3 components for the synthesis: the foundation, Meyer's smile, but he couldn't take her gift. Alienation would mean she'd lose it forever. So he took a different path. He synthesized the 2 purchased crystals with each other. I can remember voices, and I never forget a grudge. The synthesis took 9 hours. The result turned out to be strange, a gift that had no name, a function. I remember every word that caused pain, and I remember every voice that brought peace. An intermediate form, not a weapon, not a tool, a component. Now he needed to integrate this component into Meyer's gift, but how? He couldn't alienate her gift. Synthesis works only with crystals, so another approach was needed. Daniel thought for 2 days. He slept 4 hours a night. The rest of the time he spent at the terminal on the exchange. He traded, he thought, he traded again. The answer came on the 3rd night. Synthesis works with crystals. But a crystal isn't an ability. A crystal is a container, a shell. When an awakened one alienates their gift, they extract it from their body in the form of a crystal. But the gift exists even without the crystal, inside a person, in their nervous system, in their DNA. The crystal is a copy, not the original. What if synthesis can work not only with copies? What if it can work directly, not crystal plus crystal, but crystal plus a living gift, inside a person? Daniel stood in the middle of the room, his hands trembling. It was a theory, untested, dangerous. If he made a mistake, the consequences would be unpredictable. He could damage Meyer's gift forever, or worse. The risk analyst inside him was screaming, "No, the model is incomplete. There isn't enough data. The probability of success is indeterminate. Don't take a position you can't calculate." But another voice, quieter, knew. The voice of the man who had cried on the motel floor because, for the first time, he felt alive. That voice said, "She'd been carrying someone else's grief for 3 years and thought she was just pretending. Show her that she's real." Daniel called Meyer. He said he needed her help. They needed to meet. Not at the exchange, at his motel. Meyer was silent for 7 seconds. Then she replied that if this was something weird, she'd definitely break his nose. She arrived an hour later. Daniel was sitting on the floor. A crystal lay in front of him, cloudy, small. The result of an intermediate synthesis. He explained everything to her. Almost everything. He said that his ability, synthesis, allowed him to combine gifts. That he wanted to try combining this crystal with her gift. That, in theory, it could make her gift stronger. Significantly stronger. That it had never been done before. That he couldn't guarantee the result. And that if she refused, he would understand. Meyer listened. Her face betrayed nothing. 3 years behind the counter had taught her to control her facial expressions. But her pulse told Daniel everything. Fear, hope, anger, and hope again. She asked what would happen if it didn't work. Daniel answered honestly. He said he didn't know. She might lose her gift, or end up with something worse. Or nothing might happen at all. Meyer laughed softly. She said her gift was a smile that brought a little comfort. Losing that would be like losing nothing. She held out her hand. Daniel took her palm in his left hand. With his right, he took the crystal. He closed his eyes. He activated synthesis. The two streams collided and the world exploded. Synthesis with a living person turned out to be completely different. Not two streams merging into one. 3. The crystal, Meyer's gift, and Meyer herself. Her memory, her pain. 3 years behind the counter. Thousands of faces, thousands of voices, every person she'd smiled at and told she was so sorry. Each of them now surged through Daniel like an electric shock. A man, a 50-year-old man. Ability, I always know which way is north. F-. He was crying, quietly, soundlessly, just tears. A 32-year-old woman. Ability, her hair doesn't split. F-. She was screaming, demanding a reevaluation. Then she left and never came back. A teenager, 16 years old. Ability, I can sense when someone is thinking about me. F. He stood at the bar, silent, staring at the floor, his arms hanging like whips. Meyer remembered them all, every single one. Not because she wanted to, because she couldn't forget. Her micro-talent, never forgetting a grudge, worked on a broader scale than she'd thought. She remembered not only her own grievances, she remembered others as well. Every pain she'd witnessed. Daniel held her hand and his body was on fire. The synthesis was devouring energy 3 times faster than usual. He could feel the crystal in his right hand melting, literally melting. It was transforming from solid into liquid light and flowing through his palm into Meyer's. The pain was excruciating. Not his pain, hers. 3 years of pent-up grief gushed through the synthesis like water through a verse dam. Meyer screamed. Daniel squeezed her hand tighter. Don't let go. Don't let go. The model is working. The data matches. Hold your position. The synthesis lasted 40 minutes. When it ended, Daniel was lying on the floor, unable to move. Meyer sat beside him. Her eyes were open. Tears ran down her cheeks. But the look on her face, Daniel had never seen a look like that before. She raised her hand and looked at her palm, then at Daniel, then back at her palm. She said she could hear him. Daniel asked what she could hear. She said she could hear him, not his voice, him. That he was tired. That he was afraid. That even he didn't fully believe it would work. And that what he needed right now was for someone to tell him that everything was all right. Daniel lay on the floor and said nothing. Mire looked at him and said quietly, "It's okay." And he felt it. Physically. Every word washed over him like a warm wave. Not just a little. Not even 0.5%. Completely. His muscles relaxed. His pulse slowed. The anxiety receded. As if someone had pressed a button and turned off the noise. Mire covered her mouth with her hand. She understood. Daniel called it resonance. Her new ability. She hears what a person really needs to hear. And when she says it, her words reach their target. Not through logic, not through persuasion, directly, into the subconscious, right to the spot where it hurts. For 3 years, she'd thought she was pretending, that her kindness was fake, that her smile was a mask. But a mask couldn't be the foundation for resonance. Synthesis doesn't create out of nothing. It amplifies what already exists. Her kindness was real. It always had been. It was just too quiet for the world to hear it. Mire cried. Not from pain, not from relief. Because for the first time in 3 years, she believed she wasn't pretending. That the 7,000 smiles behind the counter on the lower level weren't an act, but her true self. They sat on the floor of the motel room for 2 hours. Meyer gradually got used to resonance. She said it was strange, as if she'd developed a second sense of hearing. Ordinary hearing picks up sounds. Resonance picks up needs. She hears not thoughts, but voids, places where a person is lacking something, and she knows which word will fill that gap. Daniel asked what the radius was. Mir said that right now she sensed 4 people. Him, the man behind the wall who can't sleep because he's lonely, a woman 2 floors below who needs to hear that it's not her fault, and someone far away, very far away, at the very edge of perception. That person needs to hear their name, just their name, spoken with warmth. Daniel nodded. The radius was significantly larger than he'd expected. This wasn't an F rank, not even a C. In terms of functionality, it was something on the level of a B, maybe higher. But formally, in the system, Mir was still listed as an F-, because synthesis didn't change the classification. It changed the essence. In the morning, Daniel arrived at the exchange. Mir was behind the counter, as usual, but not as usual. The first customer of the day was a man in his 30s. He'd failed his reevaluation. His B rank had been downgraded to C after he was wounded in the rift. He approached the counter looking gloomy and angry and said he wanted to divest himself of his gift and sell it, and that he didn't care how much he got for it. Mir looked at him. She paused for a second. Then she said she understood that right now it felt like he'd lost everything, but that a C rank wasn't the end. It was a new beginning. The man froze. There was something in her voice, not in the words, in the voice, in the way the sound passed through him and reached the place that ached. He stood motionless for 15 seconds. Then his shoulders slumped. The tension faded. He said quietly that he'd think about it some more. He turned and walked away. He didn't relinquish his gift. He didn't sell it. He left to think it over. Meyer watched him go, and there was a smile on her face, a real one, for the first time in 3 years. Daniel saw it from across the hall, and in his mind, the risk analyst quietly announced, "First test successful. Model confirmed. Moving on to scaling." By the end of the second month, Daniel's trading account had reached 2,000 copper coins, 2 silver ones, still nothing in the upper echelons, but enough for the next step. He rented a small office 3 blocks from the exchange, a former laundromat, cheap. He hung a homemade sign on the door, Khan and Partners, lower segment valuation. Meyer looked at the sign and asked who these partners were. Daniel replied that for now, it was just her. Mide said that in that case, the sign was lying. Daniel replied that it wasn't a lie, but a strategic forecast. Mide snorted. No one came to see them the first week. One person came the second week, an old man who bought mementos, the very same one. Mide had brought him in. She told him she knew someone who could help. The old man's name was Park Chung-ho. He was 62 years old, a former teacher. Ability: I remember the scent of every flower I've ever smelled. F-, useless. Absolutely useless. He was losing his memory. Slowly. Names went first, then faces, then events. He bought F-rank gifts related to memory, hoping that at least one of them would slow the process. None of them helped. Daniel sat across from him in a small office and listened. Divine perception scanned the old man. Neural activity, brain blood flow patterns, degree of degradation. It was bad. Not fatal, but bad. Daniel couldn't cure Alzheimer's. Synthesis isn't a medical tool, but it could do something else. He asked Park Chung-ho what he remembered best. The old man answered without hesitation, smells. He remembered the scent of jasmine in the garden where he played as a child. The smell of chalk in the classroom where he'd taught for 30 years. The smell of rain on the day his daughter was born. His ability had preserved those memories. Everything else faded away, but the smells remained. Daniel nodded. Then he opened a catalog on his tablet and began searching. An hour later, he found 3 lots. I can sense the emotions of pets by their scent, F-. I can determine the age of food by its smell, F-. I remember the sounds I heard as I fell asleep, F-. 3 coins, he bought them. He initiated the intermediate synthesis. Result: memory tied to sensory anchors, not visual, not verbal, sensory, smells, sounds, tactile sensations. Now he had to integrate this into the old man's gift. Just like with Meyer, directly, live synthesis. Daniel asked Park Chung-ho if he trusted him. The old man looked at Meyer. Meyer nodded. The old man held out his hand. The synthesis took 2 hours. It faster than with Meyer, calmer, maybe because the old man didn't resist. He wasn't afraid. He had long since stopped being afraid. When the synthesis was over, Park Chung-ho sat in a chair and said nothing. Then he said he remembered his wife's name. He remembers her voice. He remembers how she laughed when he burned himself with tea on their first date. He remembers not because he recalled it. It's because now every memory was tied to a scent. The scent of jasmine, and there was his wife. The scent of chalk, and there were 30 years in the classroom. The scent of rain, and there was his daughter. His normal memory continued to fade, but the sensory anchors held firm. Not a cure, a bridge, a detour. Enough for the old teacher to reclaim what could still be reclaimed. Park Chung-ho stood up and bowed, deeply, the way one bows only when a debt is unpayable. Meyer stood by the door, and her resonance was silent, because the old man didn't need words right now. He needed only the silence in which he could finally hear his wife's voice. When he left, Meyer turned to Daniel. She said she believed now, not in him, in what he was doing. Daniel nodded and sat down at the table. He opened the catalog. 83,000 lots, minus the 6 he'd already used. There was a lot of work ahead. He began planning the next synthesis for the next person, whoever fate might bring to him. The synthesis with Mir had been a success. Her gift had transformed into resonance. She can identify exactly what a person needs to hear and articulate it with absolute precision. Daniel opened the Han and Partners office. His first client was an elderly teacher, Park Chung-ho, who was losing his memory. Daniel didn't cure him, but he created a workaround using sensory anchors. Mir finally came to believe in his method. The threat from the Yu clan still looms on the horizon. Park So-yeon came to the Han and Partners office in her 3rd month, not because she was looking for help, because she was looking for silence. Mir found her in line on the lower level of the stock exchange, a 26-year-old woman, a former violinist with the Seoul Philharmonic. Perfect posture, perfect hands, a perfect face devoid of any emotion. She was standing in line to sell her gift, B rank, a perfect ear for detecting falseness in human speech. They were offering 400,000 for it. The intelligence agencies of 3 countries were bidding for the right to make the first offer. Meyer saw her, and resonance kicked in instantly. This woman didn't want money. She wanted to stop hearing. Meyer approached her and whispered that seen someone, that he wasn't with an intelligence agency, not part of a clan, that he had a small office in a former laundromat and a sign that lied about the number of partners. So-yeon looked at her. Meyer's resonance couldn't reach her, not because So-yeon was resisting. It was because she heard everything. Every micronote in Meyer's voice, every fluctuation, every overtone. And in the 7 years since the awakening, she had heard so many lies that she had forgotten how to distinguish the truth from yet another attempt to use her. But something in Meyer's voice was different. So-yeon couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, and that caught her attention. For the first time in years, she heard a sound she couldn't fully decipher. She arrived at the office in the evening. Daniel was sitting at his desk. A tablet, a catalog, 83,000 lots, minus the 9 that had already been sold. He looked up at her. Divine perception kicked in automatically, and Daniel saw. The first thing he noticed was her hands, a violinist's fingers. Calluses in all the right places. But no fresh ones. She hadn't played for at least a year and a half. Her muscle memory remained, but it was gradually fading. In a year, she wouldn't be able to return. Second, her hearing. Divine perception allowed Daniel to see others' gifts as structures. So-yeon's gift was enormous, far greater than B rank. It occupied nearly a third of her neural network, constantly active. She couldn't turn it off. Every sound, every voice, every word passed through a filter for insincerity. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 7 years. Third, she was on the brink. Not physically, psychologically. Imagine living in a world where everyone lies. Always. Not out of malice. People lie all the time. Little lies. Social lies. I'm fine. Good to see you. I'm not in pain. It's normal. To the average ear, it's imperceptible. To So-yeon, every lie sounded like a false note in an orchestra. In 7 years, she hadn't heard a single completely honest conversation. Not a single one. So-yeon sat down across from Daniel and said she hadn't come for help. She'd come to look at the man in whose voice Meyer heard something inexplicable. Daniel replied that he was glad to meet her and asked how he could help. So-yeon tilted her head slightly. She was listening, not to the words, to the sound. His voice passed through her filter and something didn't add up. She asked why he wasn't lying. Daniel replied that he had no reason to lie to her. So-yeon shook her head. She said that wasn't it. Everyone lies, even when they don't mean to. Subconscious micro-lies. Insecurity that sounds like insincerity. Fear masquerading as calm. He didn't have any of that. His voice was pure, completely, like a finely tuned instrument. How was that possible? Daniel thought for a moment. He didn't know the answer, but he surmised that it had something to do with divine perception. He saw the world as data. Data doesn't lie or tell the truth. It simply exists. Maybe his gift had filtered out the subconscious noise from his speech. Maybe he'd simply stopped being afraid. Maybe it was both. He didn't tell her that. Instead, he asked if she wanted to stay. Not for the synthesis, just to stay. To sit in silence. So-yeon looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. She came every evening. She sat in the corner of the office. She was silent. Sometimes Daniel worked at his desk. Sometimes he talked with Mir. So-yeon listened, not to their words, to their sounds. And every evening she left a little later than the night before. A week later, she told Daniel that he was the first person around whom her gift fell silent. It didn't turn off, it just fell silent. Because there was nothing to filter. Daniel nodded and didn't make a big deal out of it. He just kept working. So-yeon appreciated that more than any words could express. By the second week, she started helping out. Not because Daniel asked her to. Because she found it unbearable to sit around doing nothing. She quickly found her niche. So-yeon knew the world of the elite. Clans, guilds, political structures. She had grown up in a family that served Seoul's high society. Her violin opened doors to receptions where the fates of nations were decided. She knew the protocols, the hierarchies, and the undercurrents. Daniel knew the numbers. So-yeon knew the people. Together, they began mapping out the U clan, not to attack, but to defend. Daniel remembered the analyst in the expensive suit who had gone down to the lower level. The U clan was tracking the anomaly. It was watching him. They needed to understand the scale of the threat. So-yeon explained that the U clan wasn't just a business organization. It was an ecosystem. The head of the U clan was Jae-hyun, 58 years old, S rank, ability, absolute priority. Everyone around him subconsciously yielded to him in any situation. He had never lost, not because he was stronger, because his opponents retreated on their own before the fight even began. His gift operated on a subconscious level. The victim didn't even realize they were yielding. It just suddenly seemed like the rational decision, that there was no point in arguing, that it was better to walk away. Daniel listened, and his analytical mind was already building a model. Absolute priority, subconscious influence. It's like the invisible hand of the market that moves prices. You can't fight what you can't see. But if you can see it, if your perception filters out subconscious pressure as a noise signal, then Yoo Jae-hyun is an ordinary person. Strong, rich, influential, but ordinary. He recorded this in his mental model. It'll come in handy later. Right now, something else is more important. So-yeon told him about the clan's head of security, Yoona Yoo, 25 years old, the clan leader's adopted daughter. Cold, precise, with a completely impassive face. No gift could detect her emotions because she had none. Literally, when she was 12, she severed her connection to her gift, the ability to laugh from the heart. She sold her crystal to pay for her younger brother's surgery. The crystal was resold and eventually shattered. The 3 shards ended up with different owners. Irreversible. So-yeon recounted this in an even voice. But Daniel heard something in it that So-yeon rarely showed. Pity. Not for Yoona, For the world that forced a 12-year-old girl to sell her laughter. Daniel wrote that down too. You know why, head of security. She's hunting him. She doesn't know who she's looking for. Yet. 3 shards of a broken crystal in the hands of 3 owners. Irreversible. He underlined the last word. Then he crossed it out. Irreversible. A strong word. People love strong words. Impossible, unrealistic, useless. He'd heard them his whole life. Both lives. A month ago, he was told that F-rank synthesis was useless. Now he had divine perception. A week ago, he was told that living synthesis was impossible. Now Meyer could hear others' needs from 2 blocks away. Irreversible. We'll see. But that wasn't today's task. Today he had other problems. Jessica Rain burst into his office on the 92nd day. She literally burst in. The door flew off its hinges. Meyer gasped. Soyeon stood up and instinctively backed away toward the wall. Daniel remained seated. Divine perception had already scanned her the very second she kicked the door. 22 years old, American, tall, athletic, scars on her arms. Lots of scars, too many. Heart rate, 140, adrenaline through the roof. She'd been running from someone, and she was covered in blood, not someone else's, her own. A cut on her left forearm, deep. The blood flowed freely, it wouldn't clot. A gift. A rank, my blood doesn't clot. Jessica Rain, niece of the head of the American clan, officially designated as expendable in family duels of honor. She's wounded, she doesn't die. The wound doesn't heal. She's wounded again, she doesn't die again. The perfect victim, an eternal punching bag. She stood in the doorway of his office, bleeding out, and looked at Daniel with the eyes of a cornered beast. She said one word, help. So-Yeon Park joined the team. Her gift allows her to detect lies in any voice, and for the first time, Daniel fell silent in her presence. She became an analyst specializing in the elite and explained the structure of the Yu clan and the story of Yoon-Yu, who had lost the ability to laugh. Jessica Rain burst into the office, wounded and bleeding profusely. She's running from her clan. Daniel acted quickly, not because he was a hero, because divine perception was showing him her blood loss in real time, and the numbers were bad. He told Meyer to get the first aid kit from the cabinet under the sink. He told So-Yeon to close the door, what was left of it. Jessica stood there, swaying. Blood dripped from her fingers onto the linoleum. Daniel walked over to her and took her hand. Carefully. The cut ran from her wrist to her elbow. Clean, professional, made with a blade, not a random object. Someone had struck her on purpose, knowing the wound wouldn't close, knowing she would bleed out for hours. He wrapped her arm in a bandage. Pressure, not perfect, but it would slow the bleeding. Jessica looked at him, her eyes unfocused. She was losing consciousness. Meyer activated resonance. She looked at Jessica and found a word. One word. She said that Jessica was safe. Here, now, right now. 3 words passed through resonance and reached their target. Jessica shuddered. Her pulse slowed from 40 to 10 beats per minute. Her muscles relaxed slightly. The adrenaline rush subsided just enough for her to sit down. Daniel sat her down in a chair. Divine perception was working non-stop. He was reading everything. The rate of blood loss, her hemoglobin level based on her skin color, temperature of her extremities. She could hold out for about 2 more hours at this rate. That was enough. He asked who had cut her. Jessica replied haltingly, her uncle, the head of the American clan. She had refused yet another duel of honor. He punished her, personally. She ran away. She didn't remember how she'd made it to Seattle. Someone in the underground network of the Awakened told her about a guy who helps trash gifts. She isn't a trash gift. She's A rank, but she's trash in another sense. A disposable, a thing, a tool they use and put back in the box until next time. Daniel listened and thought at the same time. A rank, blood doesn't mix. Officially, a curse. Unofficially, he looked at her wounds, scars, dozens of them, on her arms, on her shoulders, on her neck. Each time, the wound didn't close. Each time, she survived. Because her gift isn't just that her blood doesn't clot, it's altered biology. Her body compensates for blood loss faster than normal. It produces new blood at an abnormal rate. Otherwise, she would have died from the very first wound. It's not a curse. It's extreme regeneration disguised as a defect. But she needs help now, not synthesis, medicine, or something in place of medicine. Daniel remembered the crystal he'd bought 3 days ago for a future synthesis. Accelerated healing of cuts on the fingers, F-. The gift of a housewife who often cut herself with a knife in the kitchen. Absolutely useless. Cuts on the fingers healed half an hour faster, but the principle. Daniel took the crystal. He looked at it. He looked at Jessica. Her blood wouldn't clot. The crystal accelerated healing. If he added it to her gift through living synthesis, blood that won't clot plus accelerated healing, the result was unpredictable. It could produce healing that worked in spite of the blood not clotting, or it could intensify the lack of clotting and kill her, or it might do nothing at all. He couldn't take the risk. Not now. Not with a dying person. Instead, he used the crystal differently. He crushed it in his hand and rubbed the contents directly into the wound. Not synthesis. A crude, one-time application, like a band-aid. The F crystal disintegrated upon contact with living blood, and its effect passed through the wound. The cut didn't close, but the bleeding slowed. It didn't stop. It slowed, enough for Jessica's body to compensate for the loss. Daniel exhaled. A temporary solution. For a few hours, Jessica looked at her hand. Blood was still flowing, but no longer in a river, just a trickle. She looked up at Daniel, and there was something in her gaze that he'd seen before. In the old teacher, in Meyer, in every person who'd been told for the first time that they were worth more than they thought. Surprise. The quiet, bitter, painful surprise of a person who is used to the world beating him down and suddenly discovers that someone is trying to stop the bleeding. She stayed. She slept in the chair for 3 days while the wound slowly healed on its own. Her body really did regenerate faster than usual. Daniel was right. The curse was a resource. It's just that no one had bothered to look at it from the right angle. On the 4th day, she got up and said she wanted to work. Daniel asked what she could do besides not dying. Jessica replied that she could fight. Good. 12 years of duels of honor had taught her everything she needed to know about close combat. Daniel nodded. He didn't need a fighter. He needed a shield, someone to stand between his people and danger. Jessica looked at Meyer, at So-Yun, at the small office in the former laundromat, at the sign on the door. She said she'd never in her life stood in front of anyone, always in place of someone else. Daniel replied that was changing today. Jessica Rain had become the 3rd partner, officially a security guard, unofficially, family. A week after Jessica arrived, Daniel went back to the catalog. He was looking for 2 specific lots. Dries quickly after Rain, F-. Rarely gets bruised, F-. 2 junk items that had seemed interesting to him 3 weeks earlier. He bought them. 4 coins. Then he sat down and began to think. Jessica's blood didn't clot. That's the basic effect. Dries quickly after Rain. That's fluid control on the body's surface. Microscopic, almost imperceptible, but control. Rarely gets bruises. That's capillary stability. Microscopic, almost imperceptible, but stability. Blood not clotting plus fluid control plus capillary stability, if synthesized correctly. If you find the intersection of meanings rather than the sum, fluid control plus non-clotting isn't just about stopping bleeding, it's about controlling blood, your own and others, upon contact. Daniel synthesized the 2 purchased crystals into an intermediate form, 7 hours. The result? Something related to controlling biological fluids at a distance of a single touch. Untitled, an intermediate form. He explained to Jessica what he wanted to do. Live synthesis, like with Meyer, like with the old man. Her gift plus the new crystal. The result, presumably. She'll be able to do more than just survive her wounds. She'll be able to stop others bleeding with a single touch. Jessica was silent for a long time. Then she asked if she'd understood correctly. From the fact that she couldn't be killed, he wanted to make her someone who wouldn't let others die. Daniel nodded. Jessica held out her hand without hesitation. The synthesis took an hour and a half. Brutal. Painful. Jessica didn't scream. She was used to pain. When it was over, she walked over to Meyer and silently touched her hand. Meyer flinched. Warmth. A strange warmth. As if the blood inside her had sped up for a second. Then it returned to normal. Jessica withdrew her hand and looked at her palm. She described what she felt. She could sense someone else's blood through her skin. She could speed it up, slow it down, stop it, just by touching them. Daniel called it reverse flow. Jessica smiled for the first time in 12 years. Not defiantly, not maliciously, quietly. Jessica Rain joined the team after escaping from the American clan. Daniel urgently helped her with her bleeding by using a crystal as a disposable bandage. Then he performed a full-scale living synthesis that transformed her curse into the reverse flow. Now she can coagulate the blood of those she wants to protect. The team has grown to 4 people. Hana Kim found them on her own, or rather, she found their system. 19 years old, a student programmer, quiet, unobtrusive, the kind of person who sits in the back row and never raises her hand. Her gift, she intuitively senses where there's an error in the code. D rank, useful for debugging, useless for everything else. She worked part-time in the MBT technical department, maintaining the lower-tier servers, the very same servers that stored data on 83,000 junk lots. Hana noticed an anomaly in the database a month before Clan U sent its analyst down there. A purchasing pattern. Someone on the lower tier was trading systematically, not chaotically, not randomly, with a model, with logic, with a mathematical precision that Hana saw just as clearly as she saw bugs in the code. Because Daniel's trading strategy was code, an algorithm, a set of rules, and Hana saw its structure, and she saw that there were no errors in it, not a single one. It stunned her. She wrote code every day. She saw errors in code every day, always, everywhere, in every program. But this algorithm was flawless, perfect. She wanted to find the person who had written it, not out of curiosity, out of hunger. Hana lived in a world where everything was broken. Code, people, systems. Her gift showed her errors not only in programs, she sensed errors in people, falsehood in words, tension in relationships, the disconnect between what a person says and what they do. She couldn't turn it off, just like Soyeon with her hearing, only worse, because Soyeon at least understood what she was hearing. Hana simply sensed that something was wrong and couldn't explain exactly what. This made social interaction a torture. Every conversation was a series of errors. Every group of people was a system with bugs. She saw the gaps and the tension, and she couldn't fix them, nor could she stop seeing them. That's why she sat in the back row. That's why she only talked with servers. Servers didn't take offense when she found errors in them. Hana arrived at the Han & Partners office on a rainy Thursday. She knocked, quietly. Jessica opened the door. She looked at the small, thin girl in a wet jacket. Jessica asked if she could help her. Hana said she was looking for the person trading on the lower tier using the error-free model. Jessica turned to Daniel. Daniel walked over to the door. Divine perception revealed the girl in her entirety to him. Sleep deprivation, anxiety, a slight tremor in her hands, autistic behavioral patterns, avoiding direct eye contact, and a gift, D rank, active, constantly active, like radar. She scanned the space non-stop, not by choice, automatically. He invited her inside. Mireille gave her some tea. So-Yun watched silently from the corner. Hana sat down and didn't look at anyone. She looked at the table, at the tablet, at the catalog, at the data. She felt comfortable there. Among the data, errors were fixable. Daniel asked how she had found him. Hana replied that she had spotted a pattern in the lower-tier database. Daniel asked if anyone else could see this pattern. Hana replied that it was unlikely, because to do so, one needed to sense the structure of the code, not just read the numbers, but she added that in a month or two, the pattern would become obvious even to a standard analysis. His model was beautiful, but not infinitely invisible. Daniel nodded. He already knew that. An analyst from the U clan confirmed his fears. Time was running out. He asked Hana if she wanted to work. Hana asked, "What on?" Daniel replied that he needed an operator, someone who could see the structure of systems, not just code, people, organizations, networks. Hana was silent for 20 seconds. Then she said quietly that she saw flaws in people and that it was repulsive, that she didn't want to see flaws in people, that she just wanted to sit in the server room and fix code, and for no one to bother her. Meyer looked at her. Resonance showed her what Hana needed right now. Meyer said quietly that sometimes what seems like a defect turns out to be a function for which a use hasn't yet been found. Hana looked up, for the first time during the entire conversation. She looked at Meyer, and Meyer smiled at her, a genuine smile, a resonant one. And Hana felt something inside her relax, by a millimeter, by a single turn of a tight screw. She said, "All right, she'd try." Hana became the 5th partner, operator, the eyes of the team within the MBT system. She still worked in the technical department. She still maintained the servers, but now she also monitored activity in the upper tiers, clan transactions, purchasing patterns, analysts' movements, anything that might indicate Clan U's interest in the lower segment. 2 weeks after Hana's arrival, Daniel conducted a synthesis for her. He took his time selecting the components. He didn't rush. He observed her. He talked. He listened. He asked questions that seemed random but weren't. When do you feel most uncomfortable around people? When you walk into a room, what's the first thing you notice? When you say you sense something off about a person, what exactly do you feel? Hannah answered slowly, choosing her words carefully. She said that when she walks into a room, she senses connections. She doesn't see them, she feels them. Who's friends with whom? Who's afraid of whom? Who's lying to whom? It's like a graph, like a network, nodes and edges. Only the nodes are people, and the edges are relationships, and flaws. Flaws are breaks, edges that should be there but aren't, or edges that shouldn't be there but are. Daniel listened, and inside him, the risk analyst calmly built a synthesis model. 2 lots. I don't mix up names. F minus minus. I remember who sat where at the school assembly. F minus minus minus. The lowest rank Daniel had ever bought. 2 coins. Intermediate synthesis. 4 hours. The result? Spatial memory of social positions, the ability to remember not names, but the places people occupy relative to one another. Then a live synthesis with Hannah. Gentle, almost painless. Hannah didn't even scream. She just closed her eyes for 20 minutes and opened them again. And she saw it, no mistakes, a map. She looked around the room and saw 4 people. Daniel, Mir, So-yeon, Jessica, and between them, lines, connections, not abstract, concrete. Meyer trusts Daniel, completely. The lock is thick and bright. So-yeon respects Daniel. The line is thinner but strong. So-yeon and Meyer, a working partnership, a smooth line without tension. Jessica. Jessica stands slightly to the side. Her lines to the others are short and new. She hasn't fit in yet, but she wants to. You can tell by the way the lines stretch from her toward the center, toward Daniel. And one more thing. Hannah looked at So-yeon and Daniel. Between them was a line that neither of them had noticed yet. Thin, almost invisible, but warm. Hannah didn't say anything, but for the first time in her life, she didn't feel out of place among people. Because now she didn't see any flaws. She saw a structure, and the structure was beautiful. Daniel called her new gift the relationship map. Hannah nodded. She liked the name. It sounded like something from her world, the world of data and graphs and pure, error-free systems. By the end of the 4th month, the Hannah and Partners team consisted of 5 people. Daniel, the strategist. Synthesizer, the invisible center. Meyer, voice. Resonance. First line of contact with clients. So-yeon, elite analyst, lie detector, diplomat. Jessica, shield, backflow, the team's sole combat asset. Hannah, operator, relationship map, the eyes within the system. 5 people. Not a single S rank, not a single A rank, unless you count Jessica, whose A rank everyone considered a curse. According to the MBT's formal classification, their combined combat power was 0. According to the informal one, Daniel sat in the office that evening after the team had left, staring at the Han and Partners sign. 5 people, 0 rating, endless potential. He smiled and opened the catalog. 83,000 lots, minus 17 used. There was a lot of work ahead. Lee Ja-so didn't come as a client. She came as a patient who refused to be a patient. 28 years old, former emergency room doctor. She left medicine 2 years ago. Not because she couldn't handle it, because she handled it too well. Her gift, sensing a pulse from 2 meters away. F rank, sounds like a useful ability for a doctor. In practice, it was a curse worse than Jessica's blood. She could sense a pulse. Every pulse within a 2-meter radius. Every second. And she could feel when a pulse was about to stop. 2 seconds before it stopped, she knew. 2 seconds. Enough to realize that a person was dying. Not enough to do anything about it. In 4 years on the ambulance squad, Leija had sensed 37 deaths. 37 times she had felt a stranger's pulse slow and stop, and there was nothing she could do to change it. 2 seconds, every single time, like a countdown timer with no pause button. She left. One day, she simply took off her badge, placed it on the desk, walked out of the hospital, and never returned. For 2 years, she worked as a waitress in a cafe, far away from people, far away from heartbeats. But her gift wouldn't go away. She could sense the pulse of every customer, every passerby on the street, every neighbor through the wall. And when the old man at the next table had a heart attack, she sensed it 2 seconds beforehand. And in those 2 seconds, she called for help. And the old man was saved. Not by her, by the people around her, but she gave them those 2 seconds. And that tore her apart, because it meant her gift was working, but too weakly. 2 seconds is almost nothing, but it's not 0. She came to Daniel because Mireille had told her about Park Chung-ho, about the old man with the sense. about how the gift that had seemed like a cruel joke had become a bridge to lost memories. Mireille didn't try to persuade her, she just told her the story. Her intuition told her that Lija had to decide for herself. Lija spent a week thinking it over. Then she came. She sat in a chair across from Daniel and spoke in an even voice, like a doctor at a staff meeting. Facts, figures, no emotion. 37 deaths, 2 seconds, not enough. Daniel listened. Divine perception showed him what she wasn't saying. Her pulse was steady, too steady, controlled. She had learned to control her body, a professional habit, but under control. Microscopic tension in her shoulders, microscopic dilation of her pupils. She was afraid, not of him, not of the synthesis. Hope. Hope was the most terrifying word in her vocabulary. 37 times she had hoped she'd make it in time. 37 times she hadn't. Daniel didn't tell her that everything would be all right. He told her the truth. He said he couldn't guarantee the outcome, that the synthesis was unpredictable, that it could make things worse, that she might lose even those 2 seconds, and that the decision was hers. Lija looked at him, and for the first time during their entire conversation, her pulse faltered, by a quarter of a beat. She asked what he needed from her. Daniel replied that he needed time, a week. He had to study her gift, find the right components, calculate the model. He didn't work blindly. Every synthesis wasn't an experiment. It was an engineering solution. Lija nodded. She understood the engineering approach. She was a doctor. Diagnosis, treatment plan, monitoring. For a week, Daniel observed her, with her permission. She came to the office every day and sat and talked with Meyer, or sat silently next to Soyeon, or drank tea and watched Hannah work at the terminal. Jessica watched her warily for the first 2 days. Then she relaxed. Hannah's relationship map showed that Lija posed no threat. Her lines to the group were cautious but warm, the lines of someone accustomed to caring for others but unable to accept care for herself. Daniel was looking for components. 2 days in the catalog. His criteria were specific. He needed gifts related to time, to foreboding, to anticipation. First lot. I wake up exactly 1 minute before the alarm goes off. F-. Internal timer, a subconscious sense of an impending event. Second lot. Noticing when a friend has lost weight. F-. Calibration for subtle changes, tracking slow processes. 2 coins. Daniel bought them and initiated an intermediate synthesis. 6 hours. Result: the ability to sense the approach of a significant change. Not a specific one, any change. A fall, growth, a shift, an intermediate form. Of no practical use on its own, but in combination with the Lija gift. 2 seconds before the pulse stops, plus the ability to sense the approach of a significant change. An intersection of meanings, not the moment of death, but a fork in the road, the point where you can still turn back. Daniel ran the model 3 times. Probability of success, about 70%. Probability of deterioration, about 10. Probability of a neutral outcome, about 20. An acceptable risk. He explained it to Lija. That's it. Numbers, probabilities, possible outcomes. Lija listened the way a doctor listens to a diagnosis. Calmly, intently. Then she said that a 10% chance of things getting worse was lower than the probability of complications during standard heart surgery. She agreed. Living synthesis. That evening, in the office. Meyer stood next to the resonance, which was turned on in case of shock. Jessica kept her hand ready in case something went wrong with the blood. Hannah monitored the perimeter. Soyeon stood by the door, quiet, focused. Daniel took Liji's hand. With his right hand, he took the crystal. Synthesis. This one was different. Quiet, like a tide, not a wave, not a shock, a slow rise of water. 2 seconds turned into a minute into 10 minutes, 10 minutes into an hour. The radius expanded. 2 meters became 5, 5 became 10. Lija sat with her eyes closed, and her face was changing. Control was slipping away. The mask was slipping away. Beneath it was a person who, for 4 years, had felt death and couldn't stop it. And now she wasn't feeling death. A fork in the road, a point of choice, a moment where it was still possible to intervene. Not in 2 seconds, in minutes, in hours, sometimes, perhaps, in a day. She opened her eyes. They were wet. She said she sensed 217 people within a radius of 100 meters, and that one of them, third floor, apartment 4, would reach a crossroads in 6 hours. Cardiac arrhythmia. He doesn't know. If he's warned now, if he takes the medicine now. 6 hours, not 2 seconds. Mir didn't need resonance to understand what Li Jia needed. She simply hugged her. Li Jia cried for 3 minutes. Then she wiped her face. She stood up. She asked Daniel if he had a phone. She needed to call an ambulance. Third floor, apartment 4. 20 minutes later, the ambulance arrived. The man was hospitalized. It was a precautionary admission. Nothing serious, for now. Li Jia stood by the window and watched the ambulance drive away. Daniel called her new gift clairvoyance. Li Jia shook her head. She said it wasn't clairvoyance. It was a chance she'd never had before. She returned to medicine 2 weeks later, not to the emergency room, to the consultative department, preventive care, early detection. She could sense a patient's critical turning point hours before a crisis struck. Every day she saved someone simply by telling the doctors, "Check on this patient right now." She wrote down the name of the first person she saved after her return in her notebook. Next to the name she wrote D.H. Daniel didn't know about this. Li Jia didn't tell him. Some things don't require words. By the 6th month, the Yu clan had stopped sending analysts. They sent an operative. Daniel found out about this from Hana. She was monitoring the MBT's internal network through lower-tier servers and noticed a new profile with Level 3 access. Level 3 isn't an analyst, it's a field agent, an information extraction specialist. The name in the system? Kang Soo-ho. 31 years old, former military, ability, accelerated muscle tissue regeneration, B rank, combatant. He was assigned to the lower tier as an observer, officially, verifying compliance with trade regulations, unofficially, to find an anomalous buyer. Daniel sat in his office, studying Kang Soo-ho's profile on his tablet screen. Divine perception allowed him to read data from the screen faster than an ordinary person could read a headline. But his reading speed didn't help with the main problem. He'd been found. Not personally, not yet, but the net was closing in. Anomalous activity on the lower tier. A single buyer with an unnaturally precise trading pattern. The Yu clan didn't know who it was, but they knew someone was there, and they'd sent someone to find out. So-yeon sat down next to him. She'd studied Kang Soo-ho's dossier through her connections in elite circles. A former military man, disciplined, methodical, not a genius, but a man of action. He'd been given a mission and he'd carry it out. Not today, not tomorrow, but he'll get it done. Daniel asked how much time they had. Hannah replied that, given their current level of cover, it would take 2 to 4 weeks. Kang Soo-ho would start by reviewing the security camera footage from the lower level. Then he'd move on to analyzing transactions, then to interviewing the staff. Mir, she'd be the first to be interviewed. She knew every client. Mir turned pale. Her intuition told her that she herself needed words of encouragement right now, but she couldn't bring herself to say them. Daniel looked at her, then at the team. 6 people in a small office that used to be a laundromat, up against the largest clan on the planet. By any formal measure, it was laughable. He said they had an advantage. They knew what the Yu clan was looking for. The Yu clan didn't know that they knew. Information asymmetry. The first rule of an analyst. Know what the enemy knows and know what the enemy doesn't know that you know. Jessica said that was all well and good, but what exactly should they do? Daniel replied, nothing. Carry on as usual, but with some adjustments. First adjustment, reduce trading activity on the lower tier. Go back to 2 or 3 trades a week. No more. The loss of revenue is offset by security. Second adjustment, Mir must prepare for the interrogation. Kang Soo-ho will come to see her. He'll ask about unusual clients. Meyer will tell the truth. Almost. She'll say that yes, there is a strange guy who buys junk lots, that she doesn't know why, that he looks like a loser, that there are dozens like him on the lower level. The truth with omissions, the most reliable kind of lie. So-yeon confirmed that this will work. Her keen ear for insincerity will allow her to rehearse Meyer's answers until they sound completely natural. If So-yeon doesn't detect any insincerity, then no one else will either. Third modification. Hada continues to monitor the network. Any change in Kang Soo-ho's access permissions, any database query, any report sent up the chain. Hana nodded. Fourth modification. Daniel stops showing up at the exchange in person. All trades are conducted via a remote terminal, through 3 proxy accounts. Hada will set it up. Fifth modification. Jessica. Daniel looked at her and said that if Kang Soo-ho somehow finds their office, she needs to be ready. Not for a fight, for an evacuation. Jessica frowned. She said she'd prefer a fight. Daniel replied that fighting an operative from the U clan wasn't a solution to the problem. It would be the start of a war. And they'd lose a war right now. They had no resources, no people, no territory. Their only advantage was their invisibility, and they had to preserve it. Jessica crossed her arms but nodded. She trusted Daniel, not because he was always right, but because he never pretended to know more than he did. The plan worked. Kang Soo-ho appeared on the lower level 3 days later. Daniel hadn't seen him in person, but his perception had detected a foreign presence through the building's vibrations. Heavy footsteps, a military bearing, controlled breathing. Hada confirmed it via the cameras, a 31-year-old man in inconspicuous clothing. But the inconspicuousness was artificial. The jacket was too new. The sneakers were too clean. A man accustomed to a uniform trying to look like a civilian. Kang Soo-ho reviewed 3 months' worth of camera footage. Hana saw his searches in real time. He was looking for familiar faces, people who visited the lower level regularly. Daniel was among them. His face flashed across the footage dozens of times. But he wasn't alone. There were other regulars on the lower level. Old man Park Chung-ho, a few collectors of trash finds, a couple of students who bought F ranks as souvenirs. Noise, exactly what Daniel had been talking about. Kang Soo-ho narrowed it down to 6 potential candidates. Daniel was on the list. But he wasn't first. First was the collector who bought F ranks related to color perception. His collection looked more suspicious. The following week, Kang Soo-ho went to see Meyer. Daniel knew about it in advance. Hannah had warned him 2 hours earlier. So-yeon had rehearsed the answers with Meyer 4 times, until they sounded perfectly natural. Kang Soo-ho sat down at the counter on the lower level and showed Meyer his MBT internal audit ID. He asked about unusual customers. Mireille shrugged. She said that all the customers on the lower level were unusual. Only strange people come here, or desperate ones, or eccentrics. Kang Soo-ho asked about a specific person who was making more transactions than usual. Mireille replied that yes, there was one. A young guy. He buys junk. He doesn't explain why. He looks harmless. She thinks he just hasn't come to terms with his F rank and is trying to find something worthwhile in the lower segment. She's seen plenty like him. They come in. They rummage through the catalog. Then they disappear. This one stayed longer than usual. Kang Soo-ho made a note of it. He asked for a name. Meyer gave it to him. Daniel Han, F-. Synthesis, decorative. Kang Soo-ho jotted it down and left. Daniel listened to Meyer's report through the secure channel that Han had set up on their phones. When Meyer finished, he was silent for 10 seconds. Then he said she'd done a great job. Mireille replied that she didn't like lying, not even to save someone. Daniel replied that he understood, and that he hoped she wouldn't have to do it again. But he knew she would, because Kang Soo-ho now knew his name. F-. Synthesis, decorative. For an operative, it was a dead end. Why track a person with a useless gift? But for the head of security for the U clan, for Yuna Yu, maybe she'd see something in it that Kang Soo-ho hadn't. Time would tell. Daniel closed his eyes, and in the darkness behind his eyelids, divine perception continued to work. 200 meters in every direction. Heartbeats, movements, life, the small lives of small people. His people, whom he must protect, at any cost. The U clan had sent field operative Kang Soo-ho to the lower level. Daniel had devised a 5-part disguise plan. Meyer successfully passed the interrogation by naming Daniel, but describing him as a harmless eccentric with a trashy gift. Kang Soo-ho wrote down the name and left. The threat had temporarily receded, but Daniel realized that Yuna Yu might see more in his name and F rank might see more in his name than the operative did. The team goes into stealth mode. Kang Soo-ho's report landed on Yuna Yu's desk 2 days later. 6 candidates, 6 profiles, 6 potential sources of the anomaly on the lower tier. Yuna read all 6. She set 5 aside. She reread the 6th 3 times. Daniel Han, 24 years old, orphan, F-. Ability, synthesis. Classification, decorative. Kang Soo-ho wrote in a note that the candidate was unlikely, a useless gift, no connections, no capital, no motivation, most likely a harmless eccentric who hasn't come to terms with failing the assessment. Yuna reread the note for the 4th time. Synthesis. She knew that word, not from the MBT catalog, from another source, from the classified folder the clan leader kept in his personal safe. The folder belonged to a dead man, Dr. Lim, a researcher who 7 years ago proved that weak gifts weren't trash but rather disassembled parts of a single original ability, a researcher who was murdered. He didn't die under strange circumstances. He was murdered, on the orders of Yoo Jae-hyun, because if the research had become public, the MBT market would have collapsed overnight. Why buy an S rank for millions when you can assemble something greater from 1,000 penny apiece lots? Yuna knew this because she'd read the file, in secret, 5 years ago. She'd found the safe open when the clan leader forgot to lock it after a late-night meeting. She read everything in 40 minutes, memorized every word. She didn't have a photographic memory, but she also didn't have the ability to forget, because the ability to forget is part of the ability to laugh from the heart. And she sold that ability when she was 12. Yuna dialed Kang Soo-ho's number. She said that candidate number 6 was a priority. The surveillance level was being raised to level 2, round-the-clock monitoring, cameras, transaction tracking, physical surveillance. Kang Soo-ho asked why. A harmless guy with a trashy gift, Yuna replied briefly. Because synthesis isn't a trash gift, it's a key. To what? She didn't answer. She hung up. 3 hours later, Hana noticed a change in the system. Kang Soo-ho's access had been elevated to level 2, round-the-clock monitoring. Target, Daniel Han. She immediately contacted Daniel. Daniel was sitting in his office, working on a new synthesis model. When he read Hana's message, his hands froze over the tablet. Round-the-clock monitoring, level 2. This wasn't just curiosity, it was a hunt. Someone in the Yu clan knows about synthesis. Not his synthesis, synthesis as a concept, Dr. Lim's research. He closed the tablet and looked up at the ceiling. Divine perception showed him 200 meters in every direction, 643 people, their heartbeats, their lives. Somewhere among them might be Kang Soo-ho, or someone else. Daniel stood up and walked over to the window. Rain. Always rain, he thought. He had 2 options. First, run, close the office, take the team with him, disappear, move to another exchange, Tokyo, London, start over, safe, sensible. The risk analyst inside him was screaming that this was the only right choice. The second option, stay, don't hide, attack, not with fists, not with force, with information. If the Yu clan knows about synthesis, then they know about Lim's research. That means they're hiding it. That means Daniel has leverage, public exposure. If the world finds out that weak gifts can be combined, the MBT market will change forever. The clans will lose their monopoly, the lower segment will become a goldmine, and every person with a trash gift will realize they're worth more than a single copper coin. Daniel stood by the window as rain streamed down the glass, and he thought about Lee Ji's 37 deaths, about Jessica's scars, about So-yeon's silence, and about Meyer's fake smile, which turned out to be real, and about Han, who for the first time had stopped seeing flaws in people. To run meant to leave them behind. Not physically, they would run together. But every client they failed to help, every worthless gift they didn't tell, you're worth more than this. That was the price of running away. Daniel turned away from the window. He gathered the team. Evening. The office. 6 people. He said that the Yu clan had gone on the active hunt, that they needed to make a decision, run or stay. He laid out both options honestly, completely, with all the risks and probabilities. Meyer said she was tired of running. 3 years on the trash tier had been an escape. She didn't want that anymore. So-yeon said she had contacts in the international media. If a media campaign was needed, she could orchestrate a leak. Jessica said that if anyone came, she'd stand in front of them. Hannah quietly said she could get files from the Yu clan's internal network. Not all of them, but enough. Leja made a single statement. She said that for the first time in 5 years, she was saving people instead of counting the dead, and that she wouldn't let anyone take that away from her. Daniel looked at them. 6 people. Not a single S rank. Not a single clan backing them. Just a small office in a former laundromat and a sign that still lied about the number of partners. He nodded. We're staying, and we're starting to prepare a counterattack. The preparations took 3 months. Daniel worked 20 hours a day. He broke the plan down into 4 phases. Phase 1. Evidence. Hana gained access to Clan U's internal servers through a vulnerability in the lower-tier system. It wasn't a hack. Technically, it was a legitimate request from a lower-tier server to an upper-tier server. The systems were connected. It's just that no one ever thought anyone from the lower tier would want to look up. Hana did, and her gift showed her every hole in the code she could slip through. She found 3 files. The first, Dr. Lim's research. The full version, 170 pages. Proof that weak gifts are fragments of a single original ability split apart by the awakening event. Second, the order to eliminate Dr. Lim, signed by Yu Jae-hyun himself. No euphemisms, plain language, eliminate. Third, the registry of confiscated gifts. Thousands of abilities taken from weak awakened individuals without their consent, officially purchased for a single coin. In fact, stolen, under pressure, under threat, under the influence of Yu Jae-hyun's gift, absolute priority. People signed the transfer agreement not because they wanted to, but because, in Yu Jae-hyun's presence, everyone yielded, subconsciously, involuntarily. It wasn't a crime under the law. It was worse. It was systemic oppression. Thousands of people robbed by a man whose gift forced them to agree. Daniel read the registry, and his hands trembled. Not out of fear, out of anger. The risk analyst inside him was cold and precise. But the man inside him, the man who had cried on the floor of that motel, who had seen the old man recall his wife's name, who had held Mir's hand during the synthesis, that man was furious. He suppressed that fury. Anger is a poor advisor. Data is a good one. Work with the data. Phase 2. Preparing the arena. In 3 weeks, it will be the anniversary of the awakening. A massive public auction in the main MBT arena, broadcast worldwide. The Yu clan traditionally puts its best lots up for sale. Among this year's lots, an archive of rare crystals, 500 units, starting price, 60 million. Daniel looked at the list, 500 crystals, and every single one was listed in the registry of confiscated items, stolen gifts, put up for sale as legitimate merchandise. He smiled, a cold smile, not a happy one. Phase 3, amplification. Daniel performed his last major synthesis. He used his last bit of money to buy 412 junk lots, 1 coin each, 412 F ranks. He synthesized them in pairs, 206 intermediate crystals, then in pairs again, 103, then again, and again, and again. Each synthesis took between 3 and 6 hours. He hadn't slept for a week. Meyer brought him food. So Yan monitored his pulse. Li Jia monitored his condition using foresight. Hannah monitored the perimeter. Jessica stood by the door. The result of a 7-day marathon, a single crystal, bright white, the size of a fist, 412 trash gifts fused into a single ability. Daniel called it return. It did one thing. It allowed one to reverse alienation, to return a taken gift to its owner, across any distance. If you have the crystal and know who it belonged to, you can send it back. Not physically, through resonance, through a bond that never completely breaks between a person and their gift. Dr. Lim described this bond in his research. Paragraph 47. An alienated gift retains a quantum link to its bearer. The bond weakens but does not disappear. With a catalyst present, return is possible. The synthesis served as the catalyst. Daniel held the crystal, his hands trembling from exhaustion. 7 days without sleep, 412 syntheses. His body was at its limit, but the crystal was ready. Phase 4. Time to take the stage. Daniel bought a cheap jacket at the thrift store around the corner. That very one. The first and only one. Gray, a little too big, with scuffs on the elbows. Meyer looked at him and said he looked like an intern they'd forgotten to fire. Daniel replied that this was exactly the look he needed. So-yeon set up communication channels with 3 international news agencies. The leak of the files would occur simultaneously with his appearance on stage. Lim's research, the liquidation order, the registry of confiscated gifts, all at once, to the whole world. Hana had embedded a backup signal into the auction's broadcast system. When Daniel activates the return, the signal will travel through the MBT servers directly to every holder of a stolen gift. 500 people worldwide. Jessica will be nearby, the shield, the reverse flow. If anyone tries to stop Daniel, physically, they'll have to get past her. Legia will monitor the hall with her foresight. Any threat, any fork in the road, she'll see it in advance. Everything was ready. There was just one problem left. Yoo Jae-hyun, S rank, top priority. He'll be on stage, and his gift will force Daniel to yield, to back down, to change his mind, subconsciously, involuntarily, like everyone else, like always. Daniel sat in his office the night before the auction, thinking about this. So-yeon sat beside him, quietly. She didn't say a word. She just sat there. Her gift lay silent beside him, as always. She said she'd heard thousands of voices, and they were all lying. And that his was the only one she didn't want to cover her ears from. Daniel looked at her. Divine perception showed him everything. Her pulse, her breath, the warmth of her skin, and the fine line between them that Hana had seen months ago. He didn't say anything. He simply reached out and touched her palm. So-yeon didn't pull away. They sat like that for 10 minutes, in silence. Then Daniel stood up and said that tomorrow he needed to buy something at the auction, for a single coin. The MBT's main arena held 20,000 spectators, and another 3 billion were watching the broadcast. The anniversary of the awakening, the biggest auction of the year. Clans from all over the world, S-ranks in expensive suits, brokers, diplomats, security, cameras, lights, holographic screens on the ceiling displayed the lots. Daniel stood in line at the entrance, wearing a cheap jacket and with a single copper coin in his pocket. The security guard looked at him, then at his awakened card. F-, synth, decorative. The security guard snorted and let him through. Ordinary people sat in the lower tiers of the stands, low-ranking awakened, onlookers. Those who had come to watch the rich spend millions on things they could never afford. Daniel sat among them. Jessica sat 2 rows away. In a jacket, hands in her pockets, eyes calm, ready. Leja stood at the entrance to the technical sector. The foresight system was scanning 20,000 people. So far, clear, not a single divergence. So-yeon was backstage, on the line, with the files. At any moment, 1 click and 3 news agencies would get everything. Mireille was sitting in the broadcast control room next to Hannah. Hannah was at the terminal, ready to send the return signal through the MBT servers when Daniel activated the crystal. The auction had been going on for 3 hours. Lots were selling for millions. S-rank fire control, 42 million. A rank short-range teleportation, 11 million. S-rank regeneration, 57 million. The crowd was buzzing. The clans were bidding. The auctioneer, dressed in a shiny suit, announced the bids with professional enthusiasm. Daniel sat and waited. His divine perception was operating at full capacity. He saw the hall as a stream of data. 20,000 pulses, temperature gradients, micro-movements. He saw Yoo Jae-hyun in the VIP box, 58 years old, graying temples, a calm face, the absolute confidence of a man who had never lost. Next to him, Yoona Yoo, 25 years old, a black suit, an expressionless face. She wasn't looking at the stage. She was scanning the hall, looking for him. She knew he was here. Daniel could feel her gaze through perception. Cold, precise, professional. She hadn't found him yet. 20,000 faces. He was one of thousands. For now, at 10:30 p.m., the auctioneer announced a special lot, the Yoo clan's archive of rare crystals. 500 items. Starting price, 60 million. A list appeared on the screen. 500 abilities, all ranked from C to A, all supposedly legally acquired. The room buzzed. 60 million. A serious sum even for major clans. 3 clans raised their paddles. 65, 70, 73. Daniel stood up. 20,000 people paid no attention to the guy in the cheap jacket who had risen from the lower stands. He walked toward the aisle. He made his way down to the stage. A security guard tried to stop him. Daniel looked at him and said he wanted to place a bid. The security guard looked at his card. F-. He almost laughed. But the auction rules were clear. Any awakened one has the right to bid. Anyone, regardless of rank. He led him through. Daniel stepped onto the stage. 20,000 pairs of eyes. 3 billion watching on camera. The auctioneer looked at him with polite bewilderment. Daniel walked up to the microphone and said he wanted to buy the archive. For 1 coin. Silence. Absolute silence for 3 seconds. Then laughter. 20,000 people laughed at once. 1 coin for a 60 million archive. The joke of the year. Yoo Jae-hyun in the VIP box smiled, subtly, Indulgent. He activated absolute priority. Not consciously, reflexively. The gift pulsed out from him in a wave. Subconscious pressure. Everyone in the hall felt it. This guy has to leave. It doesn't matter why. He just has to. It makes sense. It's the right thing to do. Why should he be standing here? Let him leave. The wave reached Daniel and passed right through him, like a radio signal passing through a receiver tuned to a different frequency. Divine perception filtered out the pressure as background noise. An extraneous signal, irrelevant data, discarded. Daniel stood on stage, motionless. Yoo Jae-hyun's smile wavered. By a millimeter. For the first time in decades, someone hadn't backed down. Daniel repeated himself. 1 coin. The host glanced nervously at the VIP box. Yoo Jae-hyun stood up. Slowly, he made his way down to the stage. 20,000 people parted before him automatically. Absolute priority. Everyone gave way. He stepped onto the stage and stood facing Daniel. 2 meters between them. He ramped up the pressure to the max. Full S-rank power. The air thickened. The people in the front rows turned pale. Some stood up and began to leave, not understanding why. Jessica clenched her fists. She wanted to leave too. Every cell in her body was screaming, "Give in!" But she kept looking at Daniel, at his back, at his cheap jacket, and stayed put. Daniel stood there, looking at Yoo Jae-hyun, calmly. For the first time in his life, the head of the Yoo clan was looking into the eyes of a man who wasn't afraid of him, who wasn't resisting, didn't fight the pressure, simply didn't feel it. As if his gift didn't exist. Yoo Jae-hyun said that a single coin was an insult and that this boy needed to know his place. Daniel replied that it wasn't an insult, it was a fair price for what was stolen. The room fell silent. The word stolen hung in the air. Daniel took out the coin and placed it on the auctioneer's podium. Then he pulled a crystal from the inner pocket of his jacket, white, shiny, the size of a fist. 412 synths, 7 sleepless nights. Yoo Jae-hyun looked at the crystal, and for the first time something other than confidence flashed in his eyes. He didn't know what it was, but he sensed it. Danger. Daniel activated Return. The crystal flared, not with fire, with light. White. Pure. So bright that the broadcast cameras were momentarily blinded. Then, the light flowed, like water, like a river of white light. It passed through Daniel and struck the auctioneer's podium, where 500 archive crystals lay. Each of the 500 crystals glowed in response. Resonance. The quantum binding described by Dr. Lim in paragraph 47. The connection between the gift and its bearer, a connection that is never truly severed. 500 crystals, 500 stolen gifts, 500 threads stretching across the entire world to people who had long forgotten that they once possessed something valuable. Hannah pressed a key. The signal traveled through the MBT servers, amplified, targeted. 500 addresses, 500 people in 37 countries. Faces appeared on the broadcast screens, live feeds, surveillance cameras, eyewitness phone calls. An elderly woman in Busan. She was standing in the kitchen washing dishes when her hands began to glow. She dropped a plate. She covered her mouth with her hand. Tears. Her gift. The one that had been taken from her 5 years ago. It had returned. A young man in Tokyo. He was walking down the street. He stopped in the middle of the crosswalk. People walked around him. He stood there, looking at his hands and laughing. A teenage girl in Berlin. She was sitting in class at school. The teacher was saying something about math. She flinched. Her eyes widened. She turned toward the window and saw the world as she hadn't seen it in 3 years. Ever since a man in an expensive suit had come to her parents and convinced them to sell her gift for a single coin. 500 people, all at once, all over the world. The crystals on the auctioneer's podium were fading one by one. They were emptying out, turning into transparent shells with no contents. The gifts were returning home. The hall was in shock. 20,000 people were silent. 3 billion viewers around the world were silent. Yoo Jae-hyun stood on stage and watched as his archive vanished. His face. Daniel saw every micro-muscle through perception, confusion, then understanding, then rage. The head of the Yoo clan turned toward Daniel. His absolute priority struck at maximum power. Directed, focused, not a wave. A spear. Leave. Fall. Submit. Daniel stood. The spear passed right through him without touching anything. Yoo Jae-hyun stepped forward. His hand rose. Physical violence. The final argument of a man who had won every battle without a fight his entire life. Jessica stepped between them. She intercepted his hand. Easily. 12 years of duels of honor. She could take a hit better than anyone on the planet. But right now, she wasn't taking it. she was stopping it. The reverse flow activated upon contact. Yoo Jae-hyun's blood slowed in his arm. Not dangerous, not fatal. But his arm went numb and dropped. He looked at Jessica in horror. She looked at him calmly. No malice, no revenge. She stood in front of Daniel, not in his place. For the first time in her life. At that moment, So-yeon pressed the button. 3 news agencies received the files simultaneously. Dr. Lim's research, the order to kill him, a complete registry of confiscated gifts with names, dates, and amounts. The broadcast screen split. On one half, the auction hall. On the other, the documents, text, numbers, evidence. The hall erupted, not with applause, but with shouts. The people in the lower rows, the ordinary awakened, those with low-rank gifts, those whom the MBT system had deemed trash, were screaming. Not out of joy, but because for the first time they were seeing the truth that had been hidden from them for 7 years. Their gifts aren't trash. Their gifts were stolen. Their dignity was stolen. Yoo Jae-hyun stood on stage as the world around him crumbled. His empire, his monopoly, his reputation, everything. In 5 minutes, he fell to his knees, not because of Daniel's absolute priority. Daniel didn't have that kind of gift. He fell because, for the first time in his life, no one around him was yielding to him. Absolute priority worked on the subconscious, but 20,000 people were now fully conscious. Rage had burned away the subconscious. His gift had become useless, like a worthless F rank. In the front row of the VIP box stood Yoona. She was looking at Daniel, not at her father. At Daniel, slowly, without taking her eyes off him. She raised her hand to the lapel of her jacket, the Yu clan insignia, a golden character. She removed it, placed it on the railing of the box, and continued to look at Daniel. There was no predatory interest in her eyes. There was no malice. There was no coldness. There was fear. Real, raw fear. The fear of a person who hadn't felt anything for 13 years and suddenly felt something. A minute later, security escorted Yoo Jae-hyun off the stage. An hour later, the Yu clan was blacklisted on every stock exchange in the world. 24 hours later, the arrests began. Daniel stood on the empty stage. 20,000 seats. Half were empty. Half were filled with people who refused to leave. They stood there, staring at the guy in the cheap jacket, trying to figure out what had just happened. Meyer's voice sounded softly in his ear through the headset. "Boss, we have a queue for consultation. 800,000 requests in 5 minutes. Daniel smiled. "Liquidity is excellent. Let's open a position." The crystal of return had worked. 500 stolen gifts were returned to their owners around the world live broadcast. So-yeon released the files on the Yu clan's crimes. Yoo Jae-hyun lost power and fell to his knees. Yoona removed the clan's insignia. The Yu clan has been destroyed as an economic force. 800,000 consultation requests. The world had changed. A year had passed. Daniel was sitting in the new office of Han and Partners, not in the former laundromat, in the actual building. 3 floors, 120 employees. The sign on the door was no longer a lie. There were 5 partners, and another 4,000 consultants worldwide. People with trash gifts who had undergone synthesis and become something greater. Daniel had taught 12 people the basics of gift combinatorics, not synthesis. Only he possessed synthesis. But he taught them to understand that F ranks could be combined, that trash wasn't the end, it was the beginning. The market had changed. The lowest tier was no longer worth a single coin. The average price of an F rank had risen 40-fold. People were buying, studying, experimenting. Not everything went smoothly. Without synthesis, combining gifts yielded results in only 1 out of 10 cases. But that one case changed lives. Meyer became the director of communications. Her resonance now worked within a 3-block radius. She negotiated with clients in person. Everyone left her not just reassured, but understanding what they actually needed. Not what they wanted, but what they needed. The difference was enormous. So-yeon returned to the violin. She played in the evenings in the empty office after everyone had left. Except for Daniel. He stayed behind. He sat at the desk and listened. Her gift remained silent beside him, as always. The only person in the world whose voice contained no falseness. They didn't talk about it. They didn't put it into words. But every evening she played, and every evening he listened, and that was enough. One night, after a concert that only he had heard, she set her violin down on the desk and said that in her entire life she had never heard a single honest word from anyone but him. Daniel replied that wasn't true, that Mireille was honest too, and Jessica, and Hana, and Lija. So-yeon shook her head. She said they were honest with her, but he was honest in general, with everyone, always, like a tuned tuning fork. She leaned in and kissed him, quietly, just once. Then she picked up her violin and left. Daniel sat in the empty office, and for the first time in 2 lifetimes, he didn't know what to say. His analytical mind was silent. The models weren't working. The data wasn't helping. He just sat there and smiled. Jessica became head of security. Her backflow made her the best field medic and the best bodyguard at the same time. She could stop bleeding with one touch and paralyze an attacker with another. The scars on her arms remained. She didn't hide them. They were part of her story, part of who she had become. The first person to stand in front of someone rather than in someone's place. Hana had grown from a shy girl into the network's chief analyst. Her relationship map now covered entire organizations. She could see the structure of any group of people, the tensions, the rifts, the hidden connections. She helped Daniel plan every operation, and she was still the first to notice things others didn't see. She never told Daniel that she'd known about him and So-yeon before they did. She just smiled when she saw them together, quietly, like someone who had finally stopped seeing flaws and started seeing beauty. Lee Ja saved people, every day. Her foresight now covered a radius of 1.5 kilometers. She worked at Seattle Central Hospital, an early detection consultant. Officially. Unofficially, they called her the Angel of the Third Floor because she always knew which patient needed to be checked right away. The list of those she'd saved in her notebook had surpassed 300. Next to the first name were still the initials DH. Old man Park Chung-ho came to the office every Tuesday. He drank tea. He told stories. He remembered every one. The sense lingered. The bridge worked. His daughter came from Busan every month. He recognized her from the doorway by the scent of jasmine she wore because she knew he remembered. Yuna Yu arrived in March. No badge, no file, no weapon. She simply walked into the office. Jessica tensed up. Mire stood up. So-yeon turned around. Hana looked up from the terminal. Lee Ja looked at her, and the premonition showed no threat, only pain. Enormous, silent, long-standing pain. Yuna stood by the door, not knowing what to say. 13 years without laughter. 13 years without joy. 13 years with a face that knew how to express nothing but coldness. She said she had come not as an enemy, not as an ally, as a patient. If he accepted such patience. Daniel rose from behind the desk. He had been waiting for this moment for half a year. Ever since the day So-yeon told him about the girl who had sold her laughter. For half a year, he had been searching. 3 shards of a broken crystal. 3 owners in 3 different cities. The first shard in an antique shop in Busan. 2.5 months of negotiations. 14 coins. The second shard in a private collection in London. So-yeon found the owner through her connections. A month of correspondence. 20 coins. The third shard in a junk lot at the Tokyo Stock Exchange. Hana discovered it in a database. 3 coins. 37 coins for 3 shards of a single broken crystal. The ability to laugh from the heart. The crystal was broken. The separation was irreversible. That's what everyone said. Daniel spent 4 months on calculations. The most complex model he had ever built. In 2 lifetimes. Synthesis works with crystals. But what if the crystal is broken? The shards aren't 3 different objects. They're one object in 3 parts. Quantum entanglement. Paragraph 47. The connection doesn't break completely. If it doesn't break between a person and a crystal, then it doesn't break between the shards either. You just need to find the resonance frequency. He found it. 3 months of calculations. 214 test syntheses on other broken crystals from the catalog. 90% failures. 10% partial successes. 1 complete success. Enough to validate the model. Daniel took 3 small shards out of his desk drawer. Cloudy, dull, dead. Fragments of a crystal that had once contained the laughter of a 12-year-old girl. He placed them on the table in front of Yuna. Yuna looked at the shards, then at Daniel. Her face betrayed no emotion. But Lee Ja, standing by the wall, saw a fork in the road. Right now, not a medical one, a different one. A fork between who Yuna was and who she could become. Daniel took the shards in his right hand. He held out his left hand to Yuna. She stared at his palm. 10 seconds, 20, 30, then she took them. The synthetic Z was unlike any of the previous ones. The 3 shards didn't merge, they were remembering. As if 3 parts of a single melody, which had been playing separately for 13 years, suddenly heard each other. Daniel was guiding them. He wasn't gluing them together, he was reminding them. Here's this part, it was here, and this one here, and this one like this, remember? The crystal remembered. The shards grew warm in his hand. They glowed, dimly, then brighter. The three parts reached out toward each other, slowly, like three streams flowing down different slopes of the same hill and finally meet at the foot of the hill. Meyer kept resonance activated, not for Yuna, for Daniel, because he was using up everything he had. Every drop of energy, every synthesis in his life had been preparation for this moment. The three shards became a single crystal, small, warm, glowing with a soft golden light. Daniel directed it through Yuna's palm. The crystal dissolved. It was absorbed. It returned. Yuna stood motionless. For a second, 2, 3. Then her face changed. Not all at once, gradually, like dawn. First her lips twitched, then the corners of her eyes. Then something broke through. She laughed, quietly, hoarsely, like a person who hadn't drunk water for 13 years and suddenly found a spring. Her laughter was uneven, hesitant. She didn't remember how to do it, but her body remembered. The 12-year-old girl inside her remembered. Her laughter grew louder, then tears welled up, then it became real, full, alive. Yuna laughed and cried and laughed again and couldn't stop. Meyer was crying. So-yeon turned away toward the window, her shoulders shaking. Jessica stood by the door, biting her lip, her eyes red. Hannah sat at the terminal, smiling quietly, and the lines on her map were changing right now. New connections, new threads. Lee Jia looked at Yuna, and the vision showed her the future, not specific events. A fork in the road. A huge fork in the road. In a year, Yuna will return to security service, but not for the clan, but for the people. She will defend those whose gifts are being taken away. She will become the best in the world because she knows the system from the inside, and because now she has a reason. Daniel was sitting on the floor. Synthesis had taken everything. He couldn't move, just like back then, at the motel, on the first day, when he cried because, for the first time, he felt alive. Yuna looked at him through her tears. She wanted to say something. She couldn't. She couldn't stop laughing. Daniel smiled at her from the floor. That was enough. That evening, he was left alone in the office. So-yeon was the last to leave. She kissed him on the forehead and told him he was impossible. Daniel replied that he was just an analyst. She shook her head and left. He sat at his desk, looking at the catalog. 83,000 lots minus a few hundred that had already been sold. Years of work lay ahead. Other exchanges, other countries, other people with gifts that the world had labeled as trash. And somewhere in the world was a second synthesis carrier, someone gathering power for a purpose different from Daniel's. And there was Dr. Lim's research, and a question to which Daniel still had no answer. The sky had cracked into 9 segments. A single ability had split into millions of shards. If they were gathered back together, if the sky were mended, what would happen? And did he have the right to do so? Dr. Lim had left synthesis not so that the sky might be mended, but so that the air could tear it apart once and for all, if he understood why it was necessary. Daniel didn't understand yet, but he saw the answer. Not entirely, just a glimpse, like the first ray of dawn. Every person to whom he had restored dignity, every worthless gift that had become something greater, every Meyer and So-yeon, Jessica, Hannah, Lee Jia, and Yuna. That is the answer. The sky didn't crack by accident. It cracked to distribute, so that everyone would receive a piece. Not power, not a weapon, a seed. And the point isn't to gather the seeds back into a single tree. The point is to plant each one. Daniel Han, D24 years old, a former systems analyst from Seattle, F-, synth, decorative. He closed the catalog, turned off the light, left the office. It was raining outside. Of course it was raining. He looked up at the sky, at the cracks between the 9 segments. Someday he'll answer Dr. Lim's question, but not today. Today he has 800,000 requests for consultations. 800,000 people who believe they're worth more than a single copper coin. And every one of them is right. Daniel smiled and walked home.